Got it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Kvetching with Adam and Jarrod. I believe this is either episode 17 or 18. We are really up there deep in the double digits at this point, slowing down a little bit for the holidays. And we've got a great guest who's going to introduce himself in a couple of seconds after we remind viewers who we are. So I'm Jarrod Tanney. I teach Jewish history at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington.
And I'm Adam Fuller, and I teach political science and Jewish studies at Youngstown State University in Ohio. And our guest?
Me and the guest. I am Andrew Pessin. I am a philosophy professor at Connecticut College, but also teaching Jewish studies and Zionism-related things there, as well as campus bureau editor for the Allgemeiner, which, in case your viewers/listeners are unaware, it's a wonderful news outlet that focuses on all issues concerning Jews and Israel. And as the campus bureau editor, it's sort of my job to keep my eye on the campus scene and help the newspaper report what's going on there. And let me tell you, it's been a very busy couple of months since October 7th in that job has sort of outweighed my full-time job, at Connecticut College a little bit.
Why did they choose the name Allgemeiner? And is that word even used in Yiddish, or it's just the German word?
I'm guessing it was Yiddish, because what I know of the history of this news outlet is that it was originally a printed Yiddish language daily called the Allgemeiner.
Oh, I didn't know
which means like what? The general, the daily, like Allgemeiner in general, or
it
something
means like
that.
The whole world, like so,
yeah, like that, yeah. And so I think it was a Yiddish print paper in New York for a number of years, and then I think it shut down for a while and then got resuscitated, and now I think we're entirely online. Certainly the part I'm most familiar with is online. And folks, if you're interested in keeping up with all the important news related to Jews in Israel, especially since October 7th, there's a free daily newsletter. Just sign up at allgemeiner.com and it comes in your inbox.
It always struck me as funny. You have Allgemeiner, Zionist outlet, and then you have Mondoweiss, militant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there couldn't be more opposite in their perspectives on the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very happy to have you here. We know your career trajectory didn't really start out in Jewish studies, right? You were a straight up, philosophy professor, dabbled a little bit in entertainment, and you're also a very accomplished novelist.
Thank you. You're kind.
You've entered the universe of Jewish studies, as many of us have entered, not expecting to when we originally set out in our academic careers.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about, your path.
Okay. So, yeah, I was a straight up philosophy professor, whatever that means exactly. But that's why I got into academia. I actually loved philosophy. I still love philosophy, I would say. But very little happens as we predict. We have a sort of joke in my family. We've got 3 boys now, teenagers, but it was pretty chaotic in our house. And our joke always was, if we managed to accomplish Plan C, that was a good day, right? Like, forget about Plan A, never had a chance Plan B. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of true of life as well, right? Like, if you get some part of Plan C done, you've had a pretty successful life. So, philosophy professor for a bunch of years. And what I can say
were you more of this is the limited knowledge of philosophy. Were you more of the continental school or the American school of philosophy?
No, analytic.
That's the American school.
That's the Anglo-American. Having said that, I have dabbled in continental, and I have certain respect for the continental tradition, but certainly philosophy as I did it and pursued it was in the analytic school, for those who are familiar with what that means. Doing philosophy, and then, life brings things to you that you don't expect, and you end up zigging instead of zagging. So, for me, it was an experience back in 2014, 2015, when I first began to understand just how sour campuses were about Israel and Jews. And I had my own particular unpleasant experience, which sort of opened my eyes to the fact that, and I'll say it is a fact, and maybe we can talk about it, but that anti-Zionism, or the hostility to Israel as we see it on most campuses, really just is driven by or equivalent to anti-Semitism. And I saw that in a very concrete way back in 2015. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so part of my response to it is I'm normally a conflict-averse person. I'm not the type of person to I don't want to get into the big debate with the Israel haters face-to-face type thing. But when I saw that, something clicked in me, and I felt that my obligation as a Jewish person, my Jewish identity has always been important and strong, and my Zionism has always been important and strong. But I was a straight up philosophy professor, and sort of Zionism was a little bit on the side. But
so if you ask them and you tell them that you believe that their anti-Zionism is really anti-Semitism.
Yeah, what was it that you witnessed concretely? There was even an article in the New York Times today, whether anti-Zionism is always anti-Semitism. What was it that you saw that triggered you and said, okay, this is definitely anti-Semitism?
So what I saw is...
Adam, I'm sorry, Adam, is that where you were going with it? Okay.
Well, no, I wanted to ask what you would say to them, right? If you were to rebut them. And
okay, well, let's first figure out what it was.
All right.
We'll see what we say.
Yeah. All right, you got like 3 balls up in the air at the same time. Okay. So I'm
but I want to know what it was he witnessed, because we're making a case here, and that's the whole point. One of the points of the network. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
What I saw was 2 things. The ease with which the intellectual skills of otherwise intellectually talented people just crumble when it comes to talking about things Israel, and the vehemence with which they can pounce on anything they feel that they can pounce on. And, you know, to put it bluntly, and this is absolutely timely in 2023, as far as I can see, everything that's going on in the last couple of months on these campuses just confirms what I saw in 2015. You have, for example, I'll just use the current example. Everyone's complaining Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. And they so clearly are not committing genocide in Gaza. There's a war going on. There's civilian casualties, every one of which is a tragedy, every one of which is attributable ultimately to Hamas, but that's a separate issue. Whatever it is, it's an abuse of language to call this a genocide. And you have all these smart people on campuses, students, and worse, the professors, the PhDs, who pounce on this, and then they have this hatred for Israel that is so visceral, and you see it in their faces. I've been attending some of the anti-Israel Zoom lectures that are given on my own campus, and I watch the way the professors speak on this, and the hatred, it's just bubbling up. So what you see is, so A, it's not a genocide, whatever it is, it's not a genocide, but because they are calling it a genocide, they're in a position where they can critique Israel from the moral high ground, because we're all against genocide. Obviously, any decent person's against genocide. And if Israel were committing a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, I would be upset about that too. I would object to that. So the ease with which they take a false proposition that Israel's committing genocide and just are committed to it and are incapable of understanding how false it is, and the hatred with which they condemn and criticize Israel, what you really have going on is they hate the Jewish state, but by condemning it as committing genocide, they can pretend they're in the morally virtuous position and they are criticizing this evil thing. So the vehemence and literally the crumbling of the intellectual capacities is indicative of the fact that this is and you know, what's sometimes called the new anti-Semitism or left-wing or progressive anti-Semitism. It's dressed up as a human rights critique. We're against genocide and they're committing genocide, but the only thing that drives it is the hatred of the Jew.
Right.
They don't behave this way towards any other country. Just in the last couple of days, I heard 2 reports. So one, Russia has been bombing civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, right? Are there rallies on the streets? Is my campus putting on a series of lectures, you know, condemning Russia? No, crickets, silence, right? And then just this past in Darfur, there's been horrific stuff going on back in Darfur in the last couple of weeks. Large-scale slaughter of people, straightforward genocidal activity, actual genocidal activity, and nobody cares, right? But if they can attack the Jewish state for committing genocide, they go all in. And the only explanation, the only way that makes sense to me, since it's so clearly not a genocide, and I can multiply those examples, is that the Jew hatred just takes over and it corrupts the intellectual faculties. So
also, if you add in that they have abandoned all academic standards that they would never abandon, not in their own scholarship, they wouldn't use the wrong word to describe something in an article that they're writing.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
But when it comes to this, they're willing to blow it all out of proportion.
That's right. There was in fact Omer Bartov, who's
that's the one I was about to say. He is one of the leading Holocaust historians of the previous generation,
an expert on genocide, right? And he came in and to my campus via Zoom, and He was cautious. He had a little bit of caution, but he said, "Oh, no, so this is not a genocide, but it could so easily become one." And there's a bit of language, and he quoted a few Israeli officials who, in the days after October 7th, immediate aftermath, said some harsh things, which everyone says harsh things. And by the way, the other side says a lot more harsh things, a lot more frequently about Israel and the Jews. But so he quoted a few Israeli officials, and he left the audience thinking, feeling like, I think most of certainly the students would walk away from that talk thinking, oh, this expert on genocide has basically just said Israel is basically perpetrating a genocide, even though he chose his words particularly carefully.
Now, I watched a video today of him. Adam, I think, did I send you the link? I posted it on my Facebook page. But it was Omer Bartov and Peter Beinartz being interviewed by Democracy Now! Okay, now Peter Beinart's a tool and a moron. We've all established.
He's a schmagegi.
Yeah, he's
a schmagegi. I think did you give him their award? He was like schmagegi of the year or something.
What he said today was the most horrific thing I've ever heard come out of his mouth. They were talking about the term intifada, and they were being asked about the term intifada and the river to the sea. Those are the two things that are, on the table at the moment. And he said intifada can just mean an uprising. I mean, it happens against Arab regimes. It doesn't necessarily mean, violence and killing people, even though a lot of those Arab uprisings were violent and killed a lot of people. But then the second intifada inevitably came up, and he said, yes, there was a lot of terrorism that occurred with the second intifada, and that was really tragic. But you have to see it in the context of the time. He actually tried to contextualize the Second Intifada, which is literally the worst ongoing mass terror that the Jewish people have experienced outside of the Holocaust.
And he is a smart guy. I will give him that. But I think he's smart. But the schmageginess of this whole thing, right? Like, on October 7th, we see a massacre of civilians, brutality, sadistic, children, pregnant women. It couldn't get worse than that. And then by the afternoon of October 17th, campus activists are screaming, intifada, intifada. So you ask, what does the word intifada mean in their mouths in that context? It can only mean endorsement of what was going on October 7th, right? Yeah. And sure, it could just mean uprising or shrugging off or something like that. But that's not how any of these activists are using it. So it's a completely dishonest argument that he's making.
Yeah, there's no way around. After the Second Intifada, at least as far as, Palestinian on Jew violence goes, I'm not interested in the other Arab states here. I mean, the Second Intifada, irrevocably made.
That's what the word means. The word means suicide bombings, right? Mass terrorism, exactly. Yeah. And same thing with the
swastika. You can't rehabilitate the swastika as an Indian symbol at this point.
Right.
But Bartov was always also on it, and he was asked about river. Well, he was asked about Intifada, but then he was asked about river to the sea.
Right.
And this is what he did to pivot the conversation away from it. He put in of course, what Hamas did was terrible and a war crime, blah blah blah. But he immediately launched into talking about how Jewish supremacists, are always talking about river to the sea from from their perspective, that it's going to be all of Israel land, and that's what the Likud government's endorsing. And then he went even further and said, and look at those revisionist Zionists, they wanted a Jewish state on both sides of the Jordan Sea. So he was making, what Jews were doing sound far worse than any possible Palestinian, or I should say Hamas, attempt to create an Islamic state from the river to the sea. I got so sick of the video at that point, I had to turn it off. I couldn't watch it anymore.
Yeah, amongst the many differences, if you want to talk about that particular argument, sure, there are some extremists. There are Jewish extremists who envision river to the sea being a Jewish state, and probably some Jewish extremists who would be okay with some serious violence against Palestinians, but they are marginalized extremists in Israeli society. And the vast majority of Israeli society, even those who are now thinking that Israel might have to keep the West Bank, but just for security reasons, right? Those are conversations happening right now. Not one of them is envisioning anything like a genocide. And there's also a big difference between preventing the establishment of a Palestinian state in the West Bank versus undoing the existence of the Israeli state, of the Jewish state that already exists. And from the river to the sea, which, you could get caught up in the etymology of it, but what you want to ask is, what does it mean in the mouths of the activists who are screaming it on campus?
Yeah.
And what it means did we talk about there was the Wall Street Journal thing? It turns out a lot of students are quite ignorant about what the phrase means. Fine. Yeah. But the ones who are the angry activists screaming it on campus are quite clear. When you scream that on the afternoon of October 7th, what you mean to endorse is what Hamas was doing. That's the version of what it means.
And in general, the best possible interpretation is that it's one state for everyone, one person, one vote. But the problem here is, well, why are you calling it Palestine? That's
exactly. Call it from the river to the Israel, it will be free. And then you've got
all people will be free from the river to the sea. Once you invoke the word Palestine from the river to the sea, you're
obviously
for a Palestinian ethno-national state, even if Jewish minority rights are protected. Period.
Exactly. So,
so it's Palestinian nationalism. They can't claim to be anti-nationalists in that case.
These folks
the point is with Bartov there, just to get back to that, was that he refused to stay focused on the river to the sea and Hamas. He had to immediately jump into Jewish supremacy, as if that somehow justifies the use of the phrase by Palestinians, because they're have historically been, Zionist maximalists who wanted the entire land.
Right. And the idea to compare it to views people had before the state was established, as if that's relevant, right?
Yeah.
But also, I can't let you slide with that phrase Jewish supremacy. It almost sounded like you were endorsing it or something like that. That is such a vile Okay. That is such a vile anti-Semitic slur and slander. And, as in my job at the Allgemeiner, where I've been since 2016, I think, the trajectory from 2015 to 2023 has been very, very clear. So for those of us who've been watching the campus scene, it's gotten uglier and uglier with each Hamas-Israel conflict. The campus responses were worse and worse. And 2021, I was already utterly shocked at how, how vicious the academy was. And that was the first time I started seeing in many of those academic statements that were supporting Hamas in May of 2021. That's where I first started seeing the phrase Jewish supremacy. And it's like right out of Goebbels, right? This is just, it is so vile and disgusting. And here were hundreds of academics signing letters condemning.
And they know what the damn phrase means. Why are they using a Nazi expression? And I honestly have come to believe that many of those, at least the ones who drafted the statement, and I will name names, I don't give a shit at this point, in their mind, I genuinely believe that they're deliberately using it because they know it'll trigger an underlying anti-Semitic current in the non-Jewish population.
Oh, absolutely. So it's anywhere from, and I want to say the same thing with about Bartov and Beinart's, their discussions of these slogans, and things like that. Either they are being massively dishonest about what these slogans mean in the mouths of the activists. And when they use phrases like Jewish supremacy, Jews are amongst the most self-critical people in the history of the world. That's one of our great traits and our greatest weaknesses, our incredible self-criticism.
At the moment, it's a weakness, but anyway,
when you're right, I agree. It might be a weakness. In fact, it's maybe even a fatal weakness. But in any case, Jewish supremacy just is a slander. It's a slur. It's a libel. It absolutely has no basis whatsoever. So if they use that either in those essays they all signed in 2021, and Omer Bartov, who, by the way, when in his Zoom lecture on my campus, he did refer to Jewish supremacy as well. Either they're just being dishonest and they're manipulative, like you're saying, like they know this is going to bring out a lot of the anti-Semites, or they really believe it. And that's actually worse, because then their brains have crumbled, right? They are just not living in the real world if they believe that Jewish supremacy characterizes or captures certainly the majority or the mainstream Israeli society or Jews. So
the issue is the leap from that, which I obviously don't believe that the majority of Israelis believe in Jewish supremacy. And to describe people like Ben Gvir and company, I mean, you need to find a different locution, even if what they're doing does technically fall into some sort of nationalist extremist zone. That phrase is just too historically compromised, because the phrase means, at the end of the day, protocols of the elders of Zion taking over the entire world.
Exactly.
So I think, again, they might actually, I think they do believe it as far as Israel goes. I genuinely think they do. Now, I don't think that they believe there's a global plot for Jewish supremacy, but they're still using it when they say American Jewish billionaires are funding Jewish supremacy. They've crossed the line there. And
I think that when you factor in things like the Israelism documentary and those kinds of propaganda, there is a sense that they actually do believe that it's global.
Yeah, but I mean, that was made by like an idiot like Simon Zimmerman, who's
right, but it's being promoted by a lot of these people.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, I'm just trying to imagine if Omer Bartov would actually screen that movie. It's you know, I mean, Mira Sucher,
I'm surprised, but you know him a lot better than I do.
Well, I don't know the guy.
You know of him a lot better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the most respected Holocaust historians. I mean, there's no, you know, I mean, if he's up there with Saul Friedlander and Christopher Browning, and then you know all those people.
But so you know, maybe those particular individuals don't believe there's some sort of global Elders of Zion conspiracy, right? But you're absolutely right.
Their audience does. Yeah.
But their audience does, and they are fueling this. And there's many people who do. I mean, there's many, right? There's many of the anti-Semites that we see even on our campuses absolutely do believe that. And even today, Beinart said something, you know, as he's looking at the pressure on the, you know, the Ivy League presidents, et cetera, you know, it's the Jewish billionaires exerting their veto. He didn't use that word, but exerting their veto over university presidents. That looks bad, right? And he's fueling this idea that, so rather than say these people have performed incredibly poorly in their functions as presidents, he's spinning it as the Jews are driving them out because these people don't support the Jewish agenda. So it's absolutely using these anti-Semitic tropes, and he's smart enough to know it. So either again, he's believes it, or he's dishonest. And
I think a lot of them are, in fact, naive about their audiences. I've talked to people on the radical side, and they are not themselves anti-Semitic, and they don't believe that their audiences, or the vast majority of the opponents of Israel, are anti-Semitic. If you ask them, they'll say maybe 2% of the radical left is anti-Semitic.
How could Bartov believe that at this point?
Well, I don't know about Bartov, but this is what I've asked of similar people.
Anyone who's written on the Holocaust knows that anti-Semitism is embedded in Western civilization and manifests itself in one way or another, and did not magically vanish after the Holocaust. It doesn't work that way.
No, I don't think that's what they think. They think it's a right-wing phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, because they're incapable of making the basic distinction between criticizing Israeli policies, which is always acceptable because you can always criticize states' policies, and demanding the undoing of the state of Israel, or which is not a criticism of any Israeli policy. And it is, of course, I was just writing a piece today. I'm like trying to work out my thoughts on this right now, but there's literally not one call ever to undo any other major historical event, right, or the undoing any other established state or anything like that. It's only Israel that they believe was founded so unjustly. And by the way, every country in the world was founded by some combination of violence and treaty or convention, right? Those are the only ways to found a country. Israel being no different. But they want to undo 1948. This is what they're trying to do, undo 1948. And it's just astonishing. It doesn't, even if, so this is, these ideas are not quite ready to debut. I'm sort of working on them right now, but I'll give it. You're hearing it here first, people.
So you're writing a book on this, or
no? Just I'm writing an essay on it, not a book.
Okay.
But what I want to do is grant. Suppose the establishment of Israel was some sort of mass injustice. I don't believe that it is. Right. I know my narrative, quote unquote, right, in which it's certainly complicated and ultimately not an injustice, blah, 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 blah. But suppose, if you really think it was an injustice, what I'm trying to argue is, although we're arguing about 2023, they're still continuing to litigate 1948 in their heads, because if Israel has been established in a just manner, then Israelis, like other human beings, have the ordinary right to defend themselves from the violence that's perpetrated against them, et cetera, et cetera. But if, and this is what I think most of the anti-Israel activists believe, as we're seeing post October 7th, if the founding of Israel is some sort of mass injustice, then Israelis are really evil people, and they don't have the right to defend themselves. So, and if they don't have the right to defend themselves, and they're really evil, this is part of the dehumanization of the anti-Israel campaign over both the BDS campaign and progressivism, like the perfect storm of those two, fundamentally dehumanize the Jew. The Jew is fundamentally the basic evil in the world. So, of course, that Jew can't be a victim because the Jew is fundamentally a perpetrator, and the
That's
Jew
why it's
isn't
white Jews against brown Palestinians.
exactly, and also Jews can't be they don't have the right to self-defense, because all humans have the right to defend themselves. But when you dehumanize the Jew, they take away that right, and so when they look at October 7th, they don't see what we see, right? They see essentially non-human evildoers getting what they deserve, as opposed to innocent children and pregnant women being slaughtered. So I actually think what enables them to tear down hostage posters, because they literally cannot entertain the concept that Jews are victims, right? Right. That was what those hostage posters represent, amongst other things. So they cannot conceive of Jews as victims, ultimately because they see 1948 as having been a mass injustice, which they want to undo.
From a larger historical perspective, it's not just not being able to see Jews as victims, because of course they see Jews in the Holocaust as victims, or the Tree of Life shootings as victims. It's the idea that the conception of the Jew in Western civilization and under Islam is that the Jew must be powerless. The Jew cannot, the very idea of Jews exercising power is something that is anathema. And it goes back to late antiquity. And, the Jews themselves, played a role in establishing that when they came up with their theology of exile after the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which they knew was not going to end well. And, they changed Jewish theology, or they changed Jewish policy and justified it theologically. We are now a spiritual nation. We are a people in exile. We will not use collective violence to establish a Jewish state until the Messiah comes, which, of course, once it became theologically embedded, is why religious Jews reacted so
initially,
with such animosity to Zionism. But I mean, that's one of the most momentous things about Zionism, and Jabotinsky forming the Jewish Legion in World War I. That's the first time since 135 AD, Jews collectively picked up weapons to fight in the name of the Jewish people.
Don't forget, they went to the gym with Nordau's Muscle Jew to get ready to pick up those weapons. Exactly right. And actually the shift of religious Jews from anti-Zionism to Zionism as the 20th century went on was very much driven by the religious notion that saving a life is saving a Jewish life for the Jews, obviously, but saving a life trumps everything else. And when they realized that conditions were life-threatening, then the religious Jews all came around as well to, most of them anyway, to accept Zionism. So
Chaim Potok's novel The Chosen captures that moment really well, among other things, and that's why I always assign it in my modern Jewish history class.
I read that in high school 100 years ago. It's probably time to reread it. Okay, I will reread it. It's been about 30, 40 years now.
For multiple reasons, not just the Zionism element.
So let me float my thesis by. So this is what I'm working on. No,
Andrew's thesis. Let's hear it.
Yeah, and your point about the Holocaust, they like people love dead Jews, to quote Dara Horn, right? So they like those Jews and can see those as victims. So I have to think a little bit about that. But so what I want to imagine, I want to grant for a moment, suppose Israel was established as an act of massive injustice, even though I don't believe that's true, but let's grant that. I want to say, even if so, it's actually quite outrageous to want to undo Israel 75 years later, right? And the main argument is, and this was one. How many moments have we had since October 7th that just get you in the kishkas, right? Many. There's just the stories are horrible, incredible. So early on, after October 7th, early on with the hostage posters, there was a brief phase where I was reading reports of the following. Rather than tear down the posters, they were recaptioning them. So they were covering up the word kidnap with the word occupier, right? And that I saw that for a few days, and happily that didn't seem to catch on, probably because it was more work than just tearing them down. But there was one in particular, I have an image of it. It was one of the 3-year-old girls. She, I think, was subsequently returned a couple of weeks ago, thank God. But beautiful, sweet 3-year-old girl on this poster, and above it was the word occupier, right? And that is so brutal and so cruel. And why is that brutal and cruel? Because that little girl is innocent. Whatever she is, she's innocent. She didn't do anything. She didn't steal anything from anybody. She's not responsible for what her great grandparents may have done once we grant the narrative of the injustice, etc. This is an innocent person who's basically, when you label her an occupier, you might as well put a target on her head, which is, of course, what Hamas did. Right. So there's something so repulsive about that. And what's repulsive is...
And Hamas said this in an interview. I heard them actually say it.
Say what?
They were asked by the BBC, well, how can you justify, killing a civilian, some old woman, living in Israel's internationally recognized border? And he said, well, that person's an occupier and therefore a
that person's occupier, right?
A colonialist, yeah.
But of course, this little girl was born to parents who was born in this land, to parents who were probably born in this land, to parents who were probably born in this land, and possibly going back hundreds or thousands of years, right? Because some of the Jewish presence does go back continuously all the way back. She might have been, the 80th generation of Jews or something, but she's still an occupier in their eyes. And so the problem is, or the sort of the metaphysical and ethical insight here is, every child is a fresh start. It's a do-over, right? Like, you're born, and separate from, like, the Catholic idea of original sin, you don't inherit the sins of your parents or your grandparents. Al Capone's kid is innocent until he or she does something too, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a really important idea. And once we grant that idea, and I'm trying to flesh it out and defend it a little bit, but once we grant that idea, we recognize, even if Jews were settler colonialists who in the 20th century came in and kicked out the Palestinians and took over, okay, that's evil. But then they had children who didn't do that, and they had children, and they had children. And as you sink into history and get a few generations in, the people who exist there today are in no way responsible for the sins of their grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents. They actually are innocent people who have human rights just like anybody else. And therefore, the anti-Zionist movement of today on campus, which has become increasingly more extreme just in the 7 or 8 years that I've been watching it closely. There used to be, like, we're establish a Palestinian state. That's what we need to do, two-state idea. But that's long gone. The anti-Israel movement on campus now is replace Israel with Palestine, absolutely, without question. But that's a massive injustice to the Israelis who live there now. And you can't correct a past injustice by perpetrating an even greater injustice against the descendants of the people. So that's kind of the idea I'm working with here. And they don't see that, because they see the original sin of the establishment of Israel. Then every generation is just an occupier, and an occupier is evil, and therefore you can kill them. Right. I want to make the case that even if there was that original sin, as you go through the generations, that sin dissipates, And
my graduate student, she graduated last spring, wrote this amazing paper in an independent study class with me, where she looked at anti-Zionism before 1948 and after 1948. And she showed anti-Zionism before 1948 was a legitimate question.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah. And then after 1948, it wasn't. And it's not just because the state of Israel was founded and calling for the liquidation of one state in the world is anti-Semitic. She showed how after 1948, they were using anti-Semitic tropes to vilify Israel in a way that was not done before 1948. So there's a major shift, and again, it has everything to do with Jewish power. I wish she had turned it into a master's thesis, because
but Andy, back to what you were saying, it's all very anachronistic, because not only do they apply the term occupier to an Israeli child, they apply the term refugee to a Palestinian child.
Exactly, right. So, well, actually, I guess that's sort of consistent, because what they're doing is like,
it's consistent,
it's consistent.
But it's both wrong.
Yeah, they're both wrong.
But they're both wrong. Yeah,
they're both wrong. Exactly. Which I didn't even think about applying this idea in that case, but I think that's a perfect another application of it. So that's could be a very friendly amendment. I think I'll share this piece with you guys if you are willing to give it a look. It's
Absolutely.
not that long.
Yeah. Well, it's the equivalent of calling every
the victim is not the same as it would have been 75 years ago. If we run still with the narrative that they're telling, it's not the same persecutor. It's not the same victim.
That's right. And I know this connects to the contemporary discussions of reparations to African Americans. I have no expertise on that, but I think Thomas Sowell, who is someone I've been reading lately and very interested in, I think he put it pretty succinctly, at least with respect to reparations. Like, to institute reparations today is to take money from people who didn't do anything and give it to people who didn't suffer anything. Right.
Well, that's a famous quote from Sowell.
Yeah. It's a very powerful quote. And, I'm not venturing an opinion on the reparations issue, but it applies in, just as we were saying, the occupier refugee question. Like, if you want to undo Israel, to undo Israel, you have to perpetrate an injustice against current Israelis who didn't do anything to benefit current quote unquote refugees who didn't suffer anything, right? So like it's sort of the same parallel there. It's powerful. So
and it's complete. The whole European colonialism model falls apart when you take into account that 60% of the population are Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
So is
right.
Iraq going to give reparations to the Mizrahi Jews? And I've heard people like our friend Carlton actually say they should have the right of return to Iraq, much as the refugees in Syria have the right of return to Palestine.
Well, that's perfect, right? Because if we accept this as a general principle, the thing I'm denying, namely that children do inherit the sins of their ancestors and they also inherit the entitlements of their ancestors, right? Like then basically everybody's going to have a claim against everybody as you go back in history, right? Like everybody's a victim. There's a wonderful Arab intellectual. His name is Hussein Abdul Hussein. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, he's with what's the think tank he's with?
FDD, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. I see him on Twitter, and every one of his Twitter things is just so knowledgeable and scholarly and right on target. And he had a post, which was probably the original inspiration for the thing I'm working on now. But he's very much about it. If we hope to have any peace in this place, we have to look forward. We can't look back because everybody's grandfather lost something, is the way he sort of puts it. Everybody has a claim against everybody at this point. And so if we insist, as the anti-Zionists do, that the children inherit the sins of their ancestors and that the refugees inherit the entitlements of their ancestors, then it's a formula for utter instability and violence of everybody. Again, it'll become a Hobbesian, state of nature, everybody against everybody, because, as Jarrod was just saying, the Jews who came to Israel, they were victims, they were persecuted, right? They were pogromed, massacred, etc. So they've got claims. Everybody's got claims against everybody.
And what does Hobbes say? You have a moral obligation to make peace and to do that through a social contract. And then you have certain things that you have to do, like forgive and forget things that have been past injustices.
Does he talk about forgiving and forgetting? Is that in Hobbes?
That's in his list of the laws of nature, that you have to forgive the past sins and kind of be willing to acquiesce and be complaisant, and also to be grateful and humble.
So, not that I know anything and nobody wants my opinion on how to make peace in the Middle East, but pretty clearly it's going to have to be by looking forward rather than looking back.
One thing on inheritance, though, if you take that idea to its logical conclusion, one could argue that the right of return for Jews is wrong, right? Because we're claiming a birthright based on our ancestry, right? I don't agree with that, but I'm just suggesting that, again, it's inheriting something that your ancestors had.
Well, actually, interestingly, some on the Israeli right want to end the law of return.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, but they want to end it for different reasons. They feel like too many non-Jews are coming in and diluting the Jewish identity. Isn't that the reason?
Not only that, but they also feel like the immigration is complete, that Israel doesn't need to absorb more world Jewry.
Yeah, but the Jews don't call it a right of return, even though I guess Birthright calls it a birthright or something. Yeah, right. No, but it's important because once you've got a Jewish state, you can settle on any policy you want, right? And you can settle on a policy that we will welcome Jews back. And even the Zionists who felt some sort of, I guess, moral entitlement or something to the land that never took the form of the land actually is ours, and therefore we have the right to expel you and violate. Like they immigrated more or less legally. The laws were complicated at the time, and they bought land, right? What brought them back was a spiritual connection and a feeling like a spiritual. I'll call it a right. Right's too strong a word, but they, if it was really a right, then the people there are wrong, and that's not how they thought it. The people who lived there, they had the right to live there too. So it was something different from a right of return. And once they've established a state, they can obviously choose a policy where they will welcome Jews back as citizens. So it's not a matter of inheriting something. I think it's a little bit different there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's part of the whole concept of ethno-nationalism and how it works. And Israel's not the only state in the world that has, this right return. I think Turkey has it, Greece has it,
and the state of Palestine has it. It's actually right. Like this is what in their mind is the foundation of the state of Palestine, is precisely the right of return to the refugees to recapture and take this place, which, as I was arguing, would be a massive injustice against the people who are currently living there. So I don't know how we got onto that. So we got onto that because once you see that this anti-Zionist movement is profoundly anti-Semitic, and I think the argument I'm making helps support that idea too. If your goal is to undo the state of Israel, that's an anti-Semitic goal. You can criticize every policy of the state of Israel. That's not intrinsically anti-Semitic, but to undo it and dismantle it is anti-Semitic, and it's perpetrating a massive injustice against the many Jews and others, of course, who live there. So once you see that, you can't unsee it, and you can't unsee
calling
it.
for a one state with one person, one vote, especially when they use the word Palestine. Right. Even if they're not going to use the word Palestine, you know there's going to be a civil war the next day. You know that if the Palestinians, once they have the majority, you know there's going to be a massacre of Jews. There's no way around that. I mean, history fully suggests that that's what's going to happen.
Right. And when Peter Beinart, who's one of the big proponents of that, that's where he's being very clever, because of course there's nothing wrong with the idea of a state that of its citizens where everybody has equal same rights to everybody else in the abstract, right? You can't dispute that that's a nice idea of a state, and we have a political scientist here, right? But in context, what that means is, there's the one Jewish state in the world is the one that has to be made into this binational state. When you've got 23 Arab states and 50 plus Muslim majority states, no one ever talks about. And separate from your point, Jarrod, your point's also a good one, which is realistically, this isn't going to work. It's unfeasible.
That system has only worked in one country, and that's Switzerland. And Switzerland is able to manage it because their differences are language rather than religion or ethnicity or heritage or anything.
Yeah.
Like that.
Hold on a sec, though. There's a difference between a binational state and a one person, one vote state, right? I mean, the U.S. is a one person, one vote state. Yugoslavia, or after Yugoslavia fell apart, and the latter in the 90s, and then into the 2000s, there was still, the Yugoslav state of Serbia and Montenegro. That's a binational state, two groups that are recognized as being distinct ethnicities or nations.
Yeah.
But to make it work, you have to have a consociational parliament.
Those don't work. Binational states do not work, or multinational states like the Soviet Union.
Switzerland works, but it's the only one.
Well, what about Spain? Spain also falls in that category, sort of. Yeah.
I don't know enough about it. I guess perhaps
Britain sort of does. Scotland does.
But that's falling apart now in Britain.
Yeah, no, I don't believe that multinational states work in practice, and the ones that have been genuinely multinational states like Yugoslavia. I mean, we've seen the results of that.
Right.
You're instituting ethno-national self-determination with an overarching government. It's not going to work. Right. It simply doesn't work. They will, at the end of the day, one of the groups will claim that this is really our land. And if people move from one section to another, they're going to go to war with each other, especially if there's a history of warfare in that region.
So that's an important empirical argument to make against a Beinartian proposal, right? I
don't even know what he means. I don't know if he's calling for just a regular unitary state, one person, one vote, or if he's actually calling for a genuinely binational state with.
What I typically hear from people proposing that is to have some kind of power sharing system like Switzerland or Canada, where they have a disproportionate number of seats for the Quebecois.
Canada's a failure, so let's not go there. Quebec has given license to practice ethnic cleansing among the Anglophone population. I will state that as an Anglophone exile from Quebec.
Let me pull it away from this very fact-based conversation, because you guys know a lot more facts than I do, especially the history stuff. I think those are important empirical considerations that would problematize a Beinartian state for sure. But I want to focus on the more theoretical consideration, which is that this is only ever raised against the one Jewish state in the world. And if any people has a justified claim to the right to have some sort of sovereignty in order to protect themselves, it would be the Jews. And so,
but also you never hear this proposed out of the Arabs there. It's Jews that want that. Right? It's a small minority of them, but I'm not aware of. I guess the Hadash party supports something like that, but it's a hybrid party of Jews and Arabs in Israel. But you rarely hear that as a proposed solution.
Oh yeah, no, and surveys show the Palestinians don't want to. They hate the Jews. What they want is to get rid of the Jews, like many of them, right? Obviously,
Yeah, they don't want to share the land with the Jews.
And that's the separate issue, which is like, how do you take, neither party wants this ultimately. So how do you decide from the comfort of your Upper West Side apartment that this would be the best solution? So those are the problems. But
and a two-state solution will ultimately involve removing the Jewish population from the new Palestinian state, whereas the Jews are not going to be, they're certainly not going to attempt to, and they're not going to be expected to, and they're not going to be allowed to remove its 15% Arab minority and tell them to go over to the Palestinian state.
Right. There was even a proposal I think it was part of the Trump plan? I don't remember now, but there was a proposal a few years back to not even move anybody, but just redraw the border. So, there's like was it the Arab Triangle or something? There's a part in the, right. That's very dense population there. And as part of, what's it called?
Trump plan had a tunnel involved.
No, that was like a tunnel between the,
right.
Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. But the dense Arab part,
tunnels. I mean, I don't,
they are digging tunnels, aren't they? But the plan was simply just to move the border, have those, they're now Israeli Arab, Arab-Israeli citizens, but you just draw the line a little differently. It would be part of Palestine, the West Bank. No, they were outraged. They were utterly outraged. That wasn't even asking anyone to move. It was just literally drawing the border differently.
Also, the Israeli Arabs don't want to be part of Palestine. That's
I know. That was actually one of the shocking results, right? So, the survey showing Hamas thought the Israeli Arabs, because in 2021 there was a lot of uprising, but what they did was so shocking that there's a lot of Israeli Arabs.
Why would they want to live under a Palestinian government? I mean, they're living in a prosperous state. They're equal before the law, more or less. I mean, they suffer some of the same, perhaps racism that a minority in the United States might suffer. But at the end of the day, most Arab
it's a better life.
Functioning very well, and are certainly not democracies.
Right.
So if they're doing well,
right. And I believe also a lot of East Jerusalem Palestinians have, when surveyed, say, even though for whatever reason they don't sign up for, to apply for citizenship.
I don't know why they haven't. Adam, do you have
but surveys, I believe, tend to show that would you rather live in an Israeli, in the Jewish state or Arab state? They largely say the Jewish state, right? Because they see what the Palestinian Arab states would look like, and that's not pleasing. So
a big problem is that the anti-Israel contingent, the world community, keeps pushing 1967 borders, that it's not enough to have a two-state solution. This has to be the two-state solution. Like, they're very adamant that they already have the map in place. Israel just needs to agree to it, right? And the Palestinians have to agree to it. But it's not tenable, right?
It's not tenable.
It's a bridge to nowhere. If that is the baseline, there is not going to be any chance of any agreement.
It was tenable in 1971, 1972, but it's not.
No.
Yeah.
That's why, even though Trump's plan was ridiculous, it at least had some kind of new idea in mind, right? It was trying to think up a new way to draw the boundaries.
Yeah.
I don't remember the details.
When people talk about the illegality of the 1967 occupation, even if we say, okay, let's say it is, it doesn't actually call for the creation of a Palestinian state. It says return the land, or return land. It doesn't even say all
right
to those who had it before. So Gaza would have to go to Egypt, and the West Bank would have to go to Jordan. And obviously that's not acceptable for Jordan, Egypt, or the Palestinian people.
Well, one solution that's been proposed is like a confederation system. That was actually originally in the Trump plan, but it was very hard to sell that, whereby Gaza becomes part of a confederation with Egypt, and the West Bank becomes part of a confederation with Jordan. But
there was one, speaking of some original ideas, right? Because it's hard to have original ideas because everything has been discussed. But Ben Kirstein, who was with the Allgemeiner, I think he's now with JNS, he wrote a piece a few years back and proposing the three-state solution, and it has a logic to it, which is let Gaza be obviously things are different post October 7th now, but let Gaza be the Palestinian state that's run by Hamas. Let Israel in the 67 borders be the Jewish state, and let the West Bank be the binational state, or the one state, one vote system that all these people are talk about. It would be a perfect chance to have an experiment to see if that could work in the West Bank, and you'd have, and I thought that was a nice idea. Again, do any of the actual parties want that idea? That's a whole separate issue. Is it feasible? Who knows? But it was a new idea, and it had this logic to it, because the West Bank might be the place you could try that one state binational, or however you put it. I don't think it would work either. Actually, who knows? But I don't think we're going to solve the, as I like to call it. I'm trying to get this phrase out there more, and I actually think it's important. I call it the Israeli-Palestinian Jewish-Arab-Muslim conflict, or the IPJMC. And I think it's important to make that complex expression be the name for it, because it is a complex issue and it has all of those elements. And even that, of course, oversimplifies, because it leaves out the role of Christianity in past and present in this conflict. It leaves out the United States, the Cold War, the Soviet Union, Russia, right? Like even China now. Iran should be mentioned explicitly. It should be the Israeli-Palestinian, Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Hamas, Iran, United States, Soviet Union, Christian conflict, which is too much. I grant that. But I do call it the IPJMC, because when you call it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you're using the framing of the anti-Zionists, because then it's big, strong Israel against tiny, fractured, vulnerable Palestine. Yeah. But at least when you say Israeli-Palestinian, Jewish, Arab, Muslim conflict, then you've got that bigger map. It's little tiny Israel against the whole Arab Muslim world.
Even if we leave aside the diaspora for a second, I mean, and even if we suggest that the neighbors that have gone to war with Israel historically have basically agreed to stop doing that, I mean, you're erasing history. Much of this, for the majority of the time, this conflict has been with the Arab states. And for much of that time, those Arabs didn't consider the Palestinians a distinct nation, and they're just Arabs.
Absolutely. And even, the Muslim part of it right now, Iran is the main driver of a lot of the violence. And that's purely Islamic reasons. And of course, Hamas is very much in the news. And they're
not even Arabs in Iran. Iran has zero reason to be involved in this conflict.
Right. So anyway, we're not going to solve the IPJMC here tonight, I'm pretty sure. But
you know what? The thing is, though, in terms of the future of the conflict, and it's also, I mean, the connection to the diaspora is the key thing here, and that's why we founded our network, and that's really my big concern here, because I do know at the end of the day, all this activism is not going to have an impact on what goes on over there, unless the radical Democrats like the Squad do in fact take over the party and they end up running the government, shut down all aid. It's not, this activism endangers diaspora Jewry far more than it endangers Israel.
And we see that clearly right now, right? Because it's Jews under assault on all these campuses and being physically assaulted.
Yeah. And I forget who wrote the piece on it. It was probably Terry Nelson, maybe Mary Melman. Sorry, what?
It's the future, because the polls are showing that 48% of Generation Z supports Hamas and what they did.
Yeah. So, I mean, even the BDS resolutions, they're directed explicitly at Israel, but the people who put them up know they're going to fail. And even if they don't fail, the administration is going to veto them and they won't have any impact. But the goal is to intimidate the Jews on those university campuses. That's the purpose. They want to make sure they're silenced.
Right. And I've argued that the other goal, the ostensible goal, is to cause some sort of economic damage to Israel, which has been a bust. It completely failed. But the more important long-term goal, which I think Jarrod's getting at, is it really, it bathes these campuses in all of these anti-Israel lies for long periods of time. And it's part of the campaign of dehumanizing and delegitimizing the Jew. And not just the Israeli Jew, but because by association, once you've dehumanized and delegitimized the Israeli Jews, if they're just evil colonial settlers, then anyone who supports them is just as bad as they are. And that's most of the Jewish community. And so the Jews on campus are also evil people. And then add that to the progressivism, which affirms Jews as white supremacists, et cetera. And that, again, that's what explains why on October 7th, campuses erupted in celebration of the murder of Jews, because the Jews have become so evil in their eyes.
Once you have Omer Bartov drafting a statement that says American Jewish billionaires funding Jewish supremacy, then you've crossed the line. It's a global movement.
But like we talked about with Corinne Blackmer on a few episodes back.
Adam's edited a book with her, by the way.
Oh, really? Okay, really? I didn't know that.
Wait, what? I edited a book with her.
Yeah. Sorry, Andy. Yeah.
I thought you said you did. So I thought, I didn't know that.
Sorry for giving you credit for a book you didn't write.
I didn't. No. I thought I heard you say Andy, but anyway, as we were talking about with her, a lot of this is motivated by anti-Westernism and not necessarily anti-Semitism, right? They're projecting their hatred of America onto Israel,
and that's really Iran. I mean, that's what's driving Iran more than anything, because historically Iran is not an anti-Semitic state by any means whatsoever. I mean, I
made the point in one of my books that America was founded or seen founded as the new Israel. Now Israel literally is
it's the new America.
Yeah,
that's right. That's interesting how that happens.
Yeah.
It's the evil surviving outpost of European imperialism.
Right.
Right.
Right. And, I think
how much of this is that and how much of this is anti-Semitism?
Well, it's a little from column A, a little from column B. I mean, it's a perfect storm. And, in the same way that the campus BDS movement, which is now just over 20 years old or so, and then the campus progressivism movement, which is approximately the same age, but has obviously gained a lot of steam in the last 10 years, especially post George Floyd, the last few years, right? They're both very different movements and directions, but they just synthesize and fuse and create the perfect storm. So it's all there. And in any individual, you might have to tease apart which is your particular motivation or what's driving you more. But in terms of the movement as a whole, both streams are.
The part that defies all logic is that the Jews were the demons of Western civilization for about 1800 years or so, right through the Holocaust.
Now we're the symbol of Western civilization. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just.
It's Nazism. The Jews are everywhere, and they could put on any hat and any disguise, and they're really controlling the levers. And it's global conspiracy thinking, and that's what the left is doing.
Right.
And in that sense, they have a lot in common with the anti-Semites who emerged in the 19th century.
Yeah.
The modern anti-Semites.
Given the time, I'm just looking ahead here. I want to talk about my novels for a couple of minutes.
Go ahead.
Just 2 minutes. So
let me just say that Andrew Pessin is also a terrific novelist. I read his book Evergreen and Nevergreen, excuse me.
Nevergreen, good catch.
And it was wonderful, and we promised him a few minutes to talk about his novels. So here we go.
All right. So in 2021, I published a novel called Nevergreen, which was my attempt. It's a satire of campus cancel culture, and its ideological excesses and its deleterious effects or impact on the Jews. And I'm very proud of that novel. I think it's a lot of fun. And I did it sort of a coded way because I didn't want to make it too Jewy, because I wanted to reach a wider audience. But it really is all about the campus campaign and assault against the Jews. So the whole thing is coded. So if you happen to buy the novel or read the novel, please reach it. I think it's actually on my website. There's a secret Jewish guide to Nevergreen, so you can see all the ways it's actually about the Jews. And that's part of the conspiratory thinking we were just mentioning a moment ago. Like,
and you were in part inspired by Howard Jacobs' novel, right?
Yeah, no, right, Jay. I think it was called Jay. Yeah, right, exactly. So that was clearly an influence on this. The campus in question, which is slightly inspired by Evergreen State College, which is a very hyper-left progressive place, on the left coast, on the West Coast out there. But in the same way that so many anti-Semites see the Jews as pulling the strings behind the scenes, so they may not be visibly present, but they're present everywhere. So the same is true. I tried to mirror that in the novel. So check out.
I felt that the Jews had been erased. That's what I felt when I read the novel.
No, they had. So and this is the part of the Jacobson influence there from the novel Jay, which is a wonderful novel also, that they make references to there's no Jews on the campus, and they make reference to the episode some years back, and there's some hints throughout the way what that episode was, but what you get the sense is that it's the episode that's responsible for the erasure of the Jews, the fact that there's no Jews on that campus.
I felt, read it around the same time that show The Chair was on, and I felt there was a bit of a parallel in there, because that show there's no Jews in it, though there's some mention tangentially, and the incident involves Nazism.
It was a Holocaust reference, right?
Yeah, the character's not supposed to be Jewish, and there's reference to a Jewish donor, but they don't actually mention they're Jewish. So it was sort of the same thing. Like, there's a total absence of Jews in this environment, yet somehow there's this history of anti-Semitism working in the background.
Right. And if you think about campus cancel culture, which has been much in the news in the past 7-8 years, etc., who other people are the targets of it, but who are the main targets of it in these progressive campuses? It's the, the conservatives, the people who stand up for old-fashioned America, or something like just our earlier conversation. And what is the BDS campaign? What has the BDS campaign been since it started on campuses? It's just been, it's a long-term cancel campaign against Israel and Zionists on campuses. And so, and that's driven, of course, by progressivism now, but again, this fusion of the red-green alliance, or the Islamists and the left-wingers, etc.
The woke Hamas alliance. That's my phrase that I've coined.
Yeah, the woke Hamas. I like the red-green alliance. That's pretty good too, but most people might not know what red-green are referring to. So yeah, so the novel's about that, and also is meant to be fun and somewhat entertaining.
What does the green refer to?
The green is Islam. That's like the color of Islam, and Hamas's bandanas are all green, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so that's Nevergreen. I have a new novel coming out next month, in a few weeks, actually. January 15th is the pub date, called Bright College Years. And I wanted it to be a little bit different, but it turns out it's sort of about the same stuff, even though it's very, very, very different. So I just want to put a plug in. It's about college. I'm stuck on campuses. Maybe I'm trying to become like the David Lodge of the 21st century. I don't know, but it's based on my own experiences in college in the 80s. So it's set in the 1980s in college, and it's about a lot of things. It's actually very philosophical. It's also meant to be funny and entertaining. But what I realized as I was sort of finishing it was that I was implicitly contrasting what college once was with what college is. So it becomes sort of another way to put a mirror up to today's campus scene, which in Nevergreen, it's not far from the truth to say today's campuses are madhouses and insane asylums. I think they're frenzied madness, and that's what Nevergreen's getting at. And this was back the way college at least once was, at least in my memory, which is a little hazy and fuzzy from all those years and all those substances I may or may not have ingested back in the day. But yeah, so it's about college in the 80s, and it ends up sort of putting. It's not a reverse mirror or an inverse mirror, but it stands in contrast to what colleges are today. So yeah, I hope people will check it out. It should be fun. Available January 15th. My website, andrewpessin.com. Full information, loads of endorsements.
See, I find that I can't break out of the Jewish mode. Anytime I try to write anything that's not Jewish, it ends up, being Jewish. It's inevitable.
Right. I actually try to write Jewish stuff, and then I end up not wanting to. So I can't go the opposite direction. Like, I really think I have some ideas for my next novel, and I should write a novel explicitly about things Jewish. And then I start and it just, I can't do it. I don't know.
Well, I pulled it off with the Seinfeld Talmud and the number of others.
Yes, congratulations on that.
You have some major endorsements for that Seinfeld Talmud.
Yeah, I do. Nicholas II, Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. Nice.
So,
nice
people. Yeah,
and I know you also wanted to talk about my brief flirtation with fame, so maybe we'll close on that.
Yeah. Andrew Pessin's actually a TV star, and hopefully the clip is still findable online. I watched it maybe about 5-6 months ago. I've watched it a couple of times. It's really funny.
Yeah, I just learned that the link on my website is dead, but I know that I'll try to fix that or find a new link. But anyway, as I like to say, I'm not an actual genius. I just played one on TV. So many, many years ago in a much earlier incarnation, and I'm almost embarrassed when people see it now because I was just so, young and hale and dark-haired and, etc. And now I got this. But I had the good fortune to play a superhero on the David Letterman show. This is already dating. Well, he's back now, right? Isn't he coming? Yeah, I think he's coming back. He's recently been back on TV. Letterman, yeah, I think he has just returned or is about to return to late night TV. Yeah. Anyway, David Letterman was a very big star talk show host. The clip is still online?
I found a link to it. Yeah.
Oh, but yeah, all right. If you don't mind sending me that link, and then I can put it on my webpage. But anyway, it's a cute little skit. It happened by accident. So I play one of a trio of superheroes where the strong guy, the fat guy, and the genius. I'm the genius. I play the genius. And we go around breaking things, eating things, and solving things, basically, which sounds pretty stupid, but somehow they wrote a really funny song and they pulled it all together, and it's actually somewhat amusing. And I happened to know someone who was interning there, and it was the day before I was to defend my PhD dissertation. And I get a call from this friend who says, they want to put this skit together. They need, someone to play a genius. Do you want to come down and audition? And so I had to decide, do I continue preparing for my PhD dissertation, or do I, take this chance at fame? And I clearly made the right decision. So I went down and auditioned and got the job, and we filmed it, the first one, that day. And I passed my dissertation defense the next day. So it all worked out.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah. And so we made it was originally like a 3-minute little film.
There were like 3 or 4. It went on for like about a year. Right?
Yeah. And then a year later, they had us come back, and we basically made like 9 minutes worth more, which they then broke up into 3 separate things. So there's sort of 4 separate 3-minute films of the strong guy, the fat guy, and the genius floating around out there.
Are you in touch with the strong guy and the fat guy?
No, it didn't last. The fat guy was actually like a stand-up comedian, and he was really hoping to turn this into something. He wanted us to start like going to, like, he was from New Jersey. He wanted to go to mall openings in New Jersey, and that like we would appear as the strong guy, the fat guy, and the genius. And I thought that was the stupidest idea I ever heard, coming from the perspective of the genius, because I would go there and people would shoot ridiculous questions at me, which I wouldn't be able to answer. And there'd be nothing fun in that, right? Yeah. That would just be horrible. So I wasn't interested in doing that. And then the second year when they
were you given the questions in advance?
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, if I had to pull it, one of them, they asked you what was the element name for sodium or something like that. I mean, I suppose I'd remember if I thought about it.
I'll tell you in a second. But so the second year, at this point, I was already in Virginia. So like they flew me in to film the second wave of this stuff. And when it was all done, and the strong guy, he was like a muscle guy, a muscle builder, from a bodybuilder also from New Jersey. They had limoed him in, and then apparently after it was all over, we went our separate ways. And I heard shortly afterwards that the strong guy, the limo on the way home, he told the guy to go pick up his friends, and he went partying in the Atlantic City with all of his buddies on David Letterman's dime, basically like this limo, and that the Letterman people were really pissed off, and they never invited us back again. So I think the strong guy blew it. He blew the money train. But to answer your question, the first year when we did it, they did not give me the answers to the questions. And then they realized pretty soon that was stupid, because half the questions I didn't know the answer, and they couldn't use that, right? So the next year we actually discussed the questions in advance, and we all sort of worked together on what the questions would be to make sure that I had answers to all the questions. So
okay, yeah. I mean, I don't think most of them were hard questions. So
well, they were like trivia. They weren't like smart questions. They were like trivia. Like, what's the area code of New Jersey? Like I don't, you don't need to be a genius to know that. You just have to be from New Jersey.
You look completely different. I honestly did not recognize you the first time I watched it.
Yeah, I was young, hale, and brown haired, and now I'm this. Happens to all of us, unfortunately.
But yeah, have hair. At least you have hair.
Yeah, true.
I've got enough though to catch fire.
That's all you need.
Yeah,
that's all you need. But anyway, it was a lot of fun, and I definitely milked if you put them all together, it comes out to 12 minutes of fame, I suppose. That's and great. Then I got 3 more, I think, with the experience that I won't talk about in 2015, but I think I got 3 more minutes of fame out of that one. So I'm done. I'm finished. Got nothing to be famous for anymore.
Well, for being on our Kvetching podcast.
Yeah, being on Kvetching.
One day we'll have more than 45 subscribers, hopefully. We're coming up.
Well, once this is out, I'll share it to my several hundreds followers. So
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you'll grab a few.
But how big's your Twitter following?
I've got, is it like 2,400 on Twitter?
Okay, so you have to retweet our stuff.
Yeah. It's, I don't know what you got to do to get a lot of Twitter. I guess you have to publish more in places that people will see more of it. I don't know, but my numbers go up. They go up very, very slowly.
Yeah. Well, all right. This has been, we went over the hour mark, of course, but this has been a really, really terrific episode. We've covered a hell of a lot of ground.
I think, did we solve the IPGMC in there? We might have.
No, I don't think, it's funny, just to finish off, I remember an episode of Night Court. Everyone remembers that show from the 1980s where for whatever reason, a Soviet diplomat and an American diplomat were trapped in the Judge Harry's office, and they actually sat down to try to figure out if they could completely figure out nuclear disarmament, and they came out with the most elaborate plan, and they solved it. And at the end, they said nah, and they tore it up.
That's right.
So, I don't think
maybe next time we'll solve it.
Yeah,
that'll be
it's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is the three of us: the strong guy, the fat guy, and the genius.
One of us is the fat guy.
I ran 5 miles today. And that doesn't make me strong necessarily. But
got strong legs. The strong-legged guy. How about that?
We all have PhDs. We're all geniuses.
Yeah, three geniuses. That should be the name of the podcast. The three geniuses.
Well, that means you have to come back every single time.
All right, I'll have to rethink that one. But
we'll just title this episode "The Three Geniuses."
The Three Geniuses. Actually,
okay,
there you go.
We got our title. Okay, perfect.
The Three Geniuses.
Right.
Anyway, thank you for having me.
Title it "The Strong Guy." Is that under copyright? Are we allowed to do that?
I don't think they'll come after you. I wouldn't worry about it. I hope they've got better things to do than to come after your 45-follower podcast. On the other hand, wait. That's what you want. You want the Letterman people to come after you. Think about the publicity.
And the $1 million lawsuit. Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to sign off now. And this is the strong guy, the fat guy, and the genius, or the three geniuses.
The strong guy, the fat guy, the genius.
It's a good song.
Very catchy song. Yeah. Thank you for
having me. To watch it and to check out Andrew Pessin's work, of course.
AndrewPessin.com. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Happy to do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, and good night, everybody.
All right. Good night.